G'day folks, welcome to this setup for the campaign game of Ted Race's Dark Valley, the East Front campaign 1941 to 1945 by GMT Games. This is the deluxe edition with the mounted board and some very thick and sturdy counters, the nice new GMT production quality. First of all, shout out to Steve Dolges. He's done a very good introduction and setup video, where he explains sort of his thinking around setup. So thanks, Steve, for doing that. And I want to kind of also explain, sort of follow on from what he's done, explain my thinking around this. So the Soviets don't have a lot of choice in their setup, basically. You've got several military districts, and units must set up in these districts. So the Odessa military district, all these units must set up in that district, all these Soviet units. They must occupy forts, they must occupy border hexes, and every border hex must either contain or be adjacent to a Soviet unit. So you can't have sort of a 3 empty hex gap, which doesn't leave a lot of room for choices, basically. It's even more restrictive in the Kiev military district. You must have a continuous line of units basically stretching from this point here north. I don't think I've got a unit to spare, in short. Once you place units in the forts along the front, you then have to place the remaining units, I think. I don't think I had any say, really, or maybe a little bit of flexibility. I could have moved this unit down here, maybe that unit across there, for example, but really not a lot of say in what to do. Likewise, up in the north, I had a bit more control in the Baltic military district. There are some stronger forces up here. And what I'll try and do is I will take you and zoom in on these districts in a moment. But yeah, the Baltic military district, the Russians, they don't have a lot of say. Behind the lines, you place units in their starting cities. So here's the Minsk defences, the Gomel defences, Moscow defences way up in the northeast, the Urel defences, and so forth. You place them all there, and then they're overstacked. So then you distribute the overstacked units to adjacent hexes, simple as that. But you do have some say here in where those overstacked units go. So I've tried to place the overstacked units along rail lines and in positions where they can help with the defence of those areas. Way off in the distance, you may be able to see the reinforcement schedule way up at the top of the screen there. It is pretty hefty. There are some massive stacks. You may be able to see sort of in the middle left there, around turn 21, a lot of guards, Soviet guards units arriving. There's a lot of sort of transitioning of units, upgrading of units, rifle corps to rifle army and things like that takes place. This is my first foray into the Dark Valley, so I'm going to be approaching it pretty slowly. And what I was thinking about doing, in fact, was planning some opening moves on Vassal, because this game has a reputation, the campaign has a reputation, a pretty well-known reputation, for being very tough for the Germans to win. The Germans need, I'll need to read this out so I don't get it wrong, but they need to secure a certain number of victory points to avoid defeat by the end of, what is it? Okay, so let me read this out. During this December 1941 victory check segment, hold on, where is it? Mark the Axis player's VP level with the Axis 41 marker. During any 42 victory segment, if the player score is 3 or points higher, mark the score, blah, blah, blah. Where is it? Soviet victory. Okay. If the Axis player has 28 or fewer victory points in 1942, the Soviet player wins. Now, so what does that mean in terms of turns and how much time do we have? Okay, well, 1942 is turn 8. So the Germans have got 7 game turns to secure 28 victory points. And it's very difficult to see. Victory points, things like that. There are victory point cities all over the place. What else? Yeah, there are 47 victory hexes marked on the map. control of the oil hexes down the southeast, Caucasus region. Determine victory. I would also point out, that the Axis start off with 14 victory points. Things like, you can see Königsberg, Danzig, Berlin over here in the west, Breslau, the Upper Silesia industrial region, Krakow, and so forth. So they do start off with 14. So really what they're striving for is an additional 14 victory points. And a lot of people have complained about it's too difficult to achieve. Particularly in your first, second, third game. Ted Racer has responded saying, well, it takes time to understand how to optimize a breakthrough, how to optimize your pursuit of victory points. He even says for new players playing their first, second, or third game to ignore that kind of limitation and just keep playing because, you don't want the game to end early after this massive setup. And that's why I think before I start moving pieces on the board, I will shift to Vassal and move. You can start with maybe do the first 2 or 3 turns of sort of Barbarossa on Vassal before I then come over here and say, okay, here's what I've learnt, here's what I'm going to do. Having said that, I have set up my units and I have tried to set up the units pretty close to kind of historical setup. So, looking here at Army Group North in the Baltic Military District, historically they drove north through here. They drove east across through here to this major highway which ran sort of along this area here to Daugavpils, across the Dvina River, and then sort of struggled with this Soviet line around. Well, actually no, they kind of pushed east. Stadia Russia, Veliki Luki here, and Novgorod up here. My maps are a bit off. So yeah, they kind of drove up here, the highway, split their forces here. A lot of arguments about where the panzer should go. But yeah, basically driving along this route, securing these rail lines, Vilnius falling early, and so forth. So I've tried to consolidate my forces in the centre. You've got a couple of options here. You could drive north, and they did kind of push north up here. But I'm focusing most of my efforts on driving north, east, and east. Clearing this rail line, which is going to be critical. I do have supply units in here, which need the rail lines to facilitate supply movement. But I also need to crack open into this open terrain, get across the Dvina River, and beyond as quickly as possible. Army Group Centre, they of course had two drives in the north and in the south, and they had 2 encirclements. They had the Bialystok, I think this is Bialystok somewhere in the centre here. There it is, that's Bialystok there. There was the Bialystok encirclement here, and then the much larger Minsk encirclement. And this is going to be difficult because the Pripyat marshes runs all the way here. And yeah, historically, we've got Brest, the fortress of Brest. It is Brest, the fortress of Brest-Litovsk here. And historically, the Germans kind of bypassed that in the first week, drove along the northern edges of the Pripyat marshes, and then encircled Minsk. Because the depiction of the marshes runs right along that road and highway, at this scale, it could be difficult to replicate that encirclement. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try and push through here. Grodno here. Going to try to smash through Grodno. Kind of move along the Niemen River, Vilnius, secure Vilnius. See what I can do. But basically, for the most part, ignore these Soviet units in this western military district around Bialystok. Try and encircle as many of those as possible. And then we've got Army Group South down here. And historically, this is where they faced the most resistance, the strongest opposition from Soviet forces. There was the push towards Lvov and the push towards Kovel. And this was where they faced that tough Soviet defense. And this is where, in fact, the Soviets very nearly encircled a lot of Germans in these early counterattacks. They hit the Germans' Army Group South, the northern edge of Army Group South here, hit I've just bumped those counters, hit a bit of a brick wall here, and slow progress during the first week of the campaign relative to the Northern Army groups. So yeah, their plan here, it looks a bit easier, apart from this big unit in Covell. They're going to try and push through here and then into the open ground beyond. Once they get through this barrier, there's a lot of nice open ground in this area down here. And then we've got the Romanian front, and I think, is this called Operation Munich, I think? And this is where they pushed through along this, they pushed east through Kishinev towards the Dniester River, but also their main breakthrough was, or their main attempt at a breakthrough was north. I've forgotten the name of this town. It begins with M. There's a little town, city on the Dniester River here that they strove for. And you get across here and it should be good. So that's why I've set up most of the Germans and Romanians in this central area here. You can see the flanks are pretty quiet. Right side, left side, I'm focusing on pushing through. And again, this is where the supplies are. So there's my supply. They will follow the rail line across that river. Driving kind of north towards Vinica, but not necessarily with the objective of Vinica. If we can get across the Dniester early, that's kind of my first priority, and then we'll figure out where to go from there. So folks, that's kind of my explanation for my setup. You've got a lot of freedom and flexibility here. You can choose where you consolidate your forces, but I've tried to adhere as closely as possible to those historical setups, as far as I know, in terms of really the density of forces. I'm not placing specific forces in specific areas, but where I've kind of tried to look for the density of forces. So that's my setup. We'll have some gameplays coming along soon. Thanks all, and take care.